Ahoy there, fellow travelers. Welcome to E-Travels with E-Trules, a personal and literary podcast of travel adventures and misadventures from around the world. This is Eric Trules, and thanks for listening. Welcome to another behind-the-scenes episode on the E-Travels with E-Trules podcast. I'm Eric Trules, and today I'll be talking with my good friend Raphael Morav, an Israeli diplomat, who I have visited in Rome in 1998, in Jerusalem in 1999, in Helsinki in 2001, and in Paris in 2014. He is currently visiting me for the first time in Los Angeles in April of 2017. Rafi, as his friends like to call him, has been stationed in each of the cities I visited him for several years at a time, working as an economic and political officer in Israeli embassies, and as a civil servant while home in Jerusalem, where he currently heads the Pacific Division covering Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. I first met Rafi and his family in Rome in 1998 through a wonderful organization called SERVAS, a non-profit, non-governmental federation of local chapter members dedicated to world peace through cultural exchange. What that means on a practical level is that SERVAS connects voluntary hosts from all over the world with voluntary member travelers, allowing the travelers to stay in the homes of the hosts for 2 nights for free. Founded in 1949 by American conscientious objector Bob Litweiler and his international friends, long before Airbnb, couchsurfing, and the Internet, SERVAS is not about saving money on the price of a hotel, but far more about creating goodwill and hospitality between people of the world and across national, political, and religious borders. Rafi is himself a longtime SERVAS host, and he was born in France. He is fluent in French and Hebrew, but since he is an avid podcast listener, I have twisted his arm to speak to me today in English. Welcome to LA, Rafi, and welcome to the show.
Welcome, Eric. It's a pleasure being with you, and as a loyal listener to E-Travel with E-Trules, it's an honor to be invited to your show.
I'm sure there's more pressure on you today than any of your ministry or diplomatic jobs, right?
Sure.
I'll ask you some things that I don't know about you. From where were you born in France, and how did you become, what was your path to becoming an Israeli diplomat?
Well, I grew up as a child in France, that's true, and I migrated...
Which part of France?
Western part of France, Anjou, it's called, where you have the castles of the Loire Valley. And as a child, I emigrated with my parents to Israel. They decided to, what they call to make aliyah, to settle down in Israel. And their ideal was to live in a kibbutz. And that's what they did. So I grew up in a kibbutz.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And after, when I went for my studies in Jerusalem, then I encountered by coincidence, notice about the opening of a cadet course for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I said, well, it could be an interesting idea to see the world while working. And so, yeah, I applied for the competition to be accepted. And surprisingly, I've been accepted. And that's how I came to become a diplomat. So it was not something really planned, but rather a matter of coincidence.
Like I say on most shows, life is what happens while you're waiting for your plans to work out, right? Mm-hmm. You can't predict what's going to happen, and you never really see the path that you're going to be traveling on. I've seen you in more places in the world than I've seen anybody else in my life. and it's uniquely due to your diplomatic postings. But before I start to travel the planet with you a little bit and the places that I visited you and other places I don't know, well, I'm curious about what was it like as a child growing up on a kibbutz? What years were these?
From 10 to 20.
And in our calendar year, 19...
So it means from 1968 to 1981 or 82, yeah. Yeah, so it was even over 20 years.
What was it like?
I think for a child it's great fun because you live in the countryside in a very safe world, and you live in a community. So and you learn to work as a farmer or as a member or as a future member of the kibbutz. So from the age of 10, you start working in the farm. And gradually you get more responsibility. So I think it's a very good school for life, because it learns you to take responsibility and to share life in community. And for me, it was a great experience.
Do you remember there being any culture shock or funny transition from coming from France to living in a kibbutz in Israel?
Well, I had to learn the language, but, after 1 year, I think I was done. As a child, it's relatively easy. And, yes, it was a bit, if you can't call it cultural shock or social shock, is to get used to live in a community, because in the kibbutz, all the children live together, separated from their parents. They come and visit their parents for the evening, but they return to sleep in the children's house. And in the morning, they are taken care by a kind of nanny or an adult who take care of them. And so it's not something that I was used to in France. I was used to a rather individual life and family life.
Yes, it's quite different, huh?
Yeah.
We always heard, I grew up in a middle-class Jewish American family in New York on Long Island. And every once in a while, a high school student or somebody older would go to live on a kibbutz. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a quick immersion, but I think it's far different than literally growing up as part of a community and not having I don't know what you call that, a central primary family and being part of such a bigger community. I think it's also, just by observation, made you more open to the world and being a more open, flexible person and host, and having many people come through your life and through your homes around the world, and maybe even preparing you to become a diplomat, which requires some social skills and an allegiance to a country, something that's bigger than yourself.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's important to stress that the kibbutz is not a sect or any kind of closed society, but quite the opposite. It is open. It was open to receive new members, and it had, and maybe still has, an ambition to be an example, to set an example for a just way of life, which is, I think, still valid today. And as an open kibbutz, so we had a lot of contacts not only with Israelis, but with volunteers, as you mentioned, who were coming regularly to the kibbutz for periods of 1-2 months. So I still have friends from these periods from all over the world. My brother is married to an ex-volunteer. And so as you're talking about openness to the world, I think that's something that I gathered during this period. Yes, and also the members of the kibbutz are coming from different parts of the world. Majority are coming from Brazil, the kibbutz where I grew up, but you had from Egypt, you had from other countries as well as, and of course, Israeli born.
At what point do you leave the kibbutz? I imagine it's after something that we equate to high school. And then I think most of us have heard that most young people go into the Israeli army.
Yes, I did serve the Israeli army for 3 years. That's a duty, obligation in Israel. And then I returned to the kibbutz for 1 year because I said myself that I want to experience life as an adult, which is different than child. And after 1 year, I wanted to go for studies in Jerusalem. And the kibbutz asked me to wait for another year before I will be sent by the kibbutz, which means also then that you have to return and to work in the kibbutz. And I decided that at this point of time that I prefer to go on my own way, to go there to do my studies. And that's what I did.
In the Foreign Service already at that
No,
point?
no, at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Okay, that was for doing my BA. And the end of my BA, then I saw this notice for the cadet course, which is then at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for 2 more years.
So how long was your training for the Foreign Service, and where was your first post?
So the training was 2 years, and my first post was in Liberia, in West Africa.
What was that like?
That was quite exotic. As a first post abroad, it was great because everything is new, and that's the first time that you have the responsibilities of a diplomat. So that was quite challenging. And what I enjoyed much, it was a bit like a kibbutz in a sense, because in these countries, if you're an expat, you have really nothing for entertainment. You have no theater, no cinema, nothing. So the only thing that you could do is to socialize with other people. And so we had very good contacts and very good friendship that we created during this period. Mainly with expats, but not only, because also with the local Liberians, we had they were very kind, and me and my family and my second son was born during the period that we were there, and we felt very safely, and so it was really a good experience.
I think you told me yesterday you tested me and I failed, but the capital of Liberia is Monrovia, named after our 5th president, James Monroe. What language do they speak? I would guess French.
Well, no. They speak English, and they called their capital after the President Monroe because actually it's a country that was founded by the liberated Afro-American slaves, who some of them, like the Zionist movement that we may explore later, decided to
Zionist movement.
Yeah, it's a kind of black Zionist movement. So their Zion was returned to Africa, Africa. And the only place that at that time they didn't know where exactly they came from, okay? Because it was 1 or 2 generations after, and those who were taken as slaves didn't know the country, as the colony, the colonizers decided to call them. But the only piece of land that was not occupied by any
Europeans?
Yes, was where is Liberia today in West Africa, because otherwise you had French on one side, and you had in Guinea, and you had the British in Ghana and Nigeria, and so the piece of land that was basically free. So they came and settled down, but what happened is that in the eyes of the local tribes, they were seen also as a kind of invader. So it was not so easy for them to be accepted, but they ruled the country for about 100 years. And just when we were there, or a few years before we were there was a military coup where, for the first time, a local one of the people from the tribes took over the power from the Americo-Liberians, as they call them. And since then, it's now it's as I understand, it's more shared government.
This is, I think, admittedly a Merocentric question, just not having any knowledge. How many countries is Israeli sending diplomats to, and why would they send diplomats to a country like Liberia?
So we have around 100 representations abroad. It includes embassies as well as consulate generals, but it's mostly embassies. And we had an embassy in Liberia, because for two reasons. Because first of all, they were the first country after 73 to renew relations with Israel. So I explain. In 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, most of the African countries decided to cut off their relations with Israel. As a matter of,
does that have anything to do with them being Muslim nations?
Not at all. They're not Muslims, but it was as a matter of solidarity with Egypt and another African country that was in war with Israel. So most of them cut off their relations with Israel. And later on in 1980, the president of Liberia, Simon Kenyon Doe, was the first leader of West Africa to renew the relations. He realized that it's abnormal that a sovereign country cannot decide on its own foreign relations, and he thought that it would be a right thing to have relations back with Israel, because Israel was very active in the 60s in cooperation in development in Liberia. We had farms, we had doctors, we had a lot of cooperation, not only in Liberia, but in most of the black African countries. So he thought that it would be normal to renew the relations with Israel, and that's what he did. And then as a gesture, we decided that we shall open an embassy in Monrovia, because they opened an embassy in Israel.
I see. At what point did you get married, and did you bring your family from the first post to the last post?
Yes, indeed. I got married after my studies when I was a cadet at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And by the time we were sent to Liberia, we had one child born. And 1 year after, we were in Liberia, so our second son was born.
It's certainly been a pleasure and amazing to see you over so many years in so many places, and to see your boys grow up. I know you have a girl, but I don't know her very well because she's a little younger than the boys. But I was at your oldest son, Liran's bar mitzvah in Jerusalem in 1999.
Yeah.
We played ping pong together, and he never let me forget that I beat him. And when I saw him years later, he was very happy to be able to beat me in ping pong. But when I came with my own wife to Paris to see you so many years later, 2014, as opposed to 99, I guess 15 years later. So he was 28 years old, studying at Cambridge, and now he's getting a PhD. And he came to Paris to particularly say hello. It was really nice. And to see a bar mitzvah boy to become a 28-year-old young man, and to see Elon, your younger son, yesterday, who I last saw when he was 11 years old in Jerusalem, and to see him as a young 26-year-old man living in San Francisco is pretty fantastic. And I think it's a shout out and a compliment to SERVAS and the friendships that people can make cross borders and cross cultures, and I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, and it brings me back to the idea of the kibbutz. I think SERVAS and kibbutz are very much in common, because also SERVAS tries to create a kind of community. Okay, not living all the time together, but sharing together life as a host and guest. So for me, it goes together very well.
I think you told me yesterday that you said when you were in Rome in '98 was your first experience hosting as a SERVAS host. And I don't know if you knew the rules back then, but you were only supposed to host me for 2 days. And I think I ended up staying in and out for over a month.
Well, with exceptional guests, we make exceptions.
And I saw all of Rome, and I traveled to Sicily, and I used every place I visited you, I used as sort of a home base, and I'd go off for a while. In Helsinki, I went north into the above the almost to the Arctic Circle, and I would go away for weeks or days, and then I would come back, and it was always such a welcoming and comfortable thing to have such trusting and gracious hosts wherever you were posted.
Yeah, it was definitely a pleasure. And also, when sometimes you think that, if I'm wherever I'm hosted by someone, he will give me tips and recommendations what to see, where to go. But it happens quite the opposite, that the guest would travel to places where we have not been yet in the country and said, you have to go there because it's really great. And then we will follow.
I think that's true anywhere. It's one of it's definitely the reciprocal side of SERVAS, where if you don't travel, you're not a traveler. Well, some people wonder why you just want to be a host, because you can see the world through the eyes of your traveler, of your guest, and be a vicarious traveler if that's what you are interested in doing. Let's talk about some of the places that I think you had a second post that I don't know about, and you also mentioned being in New York for a little while, maybe working at the UN.
That's right. My second post was in Brussels. When we decided to create a separate representation to the EU. It was then already called still the European Communities, but that was something new that we realized that it's going to be an important political player on the international arena. So we decided that it's time to learn, to study, and to have contacts with this entity.
What year was that?
That was 1990. So I did it for 2 years. I returned to Israel for 2 years, then in Rome for 4 years. This is where we met. But talking about New York, that was even before Liberia. That was 3 months assignment at our permanent mission to the UN, and during the General Assembly.
Were you still a cadet at that point, or?
Yes, actually, yes. That's part of the experience as a cadet, that you are sent to a short mission in order to see how you behave, how you react to be in a different environment. Because sometimes you can have someone who is brilliant in Israel because he's confident in his own language, in Hebrew, and in the cultural environment of Israel, and once he's abroad, all of a sudden he's lost. So it's very important to test him on the ground, so to say, to test him abroad.
Yeah. Well, you've been in some major capitals of the world, like Rome and Paris, and you've been in some other places that are less centers of the world, like Liberia and Helsinki. What stands out about each of the places? If we talk about Rome, what stands out for you? You were there 4 years.
It's difficult first of all, to compare one place to the other, especially when you stay for a long period, because it means that you live in the place. You are not just traveling, okay? And our task is that when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So I did learn Italian, and I did learn the history and the culture and the country, and waived my network of contacts in order to know better the country. And for me, it was an amazing experience, because Italy is a culturally very rich country. So I learned a lot, and so that was the experience of Rome. And you never get bored. I mean, you can travel within 1 hour from Rome, and you have always something to see all year round.
Did you see a lot of art there?
Art, archaeology, yeah, certainly. Culture, generally speaking, also, yeah, certainly.
And then you came back to Jerusalem, because I met you at 98, the end of your post in Rome and Italy. And then you convinced me to come visit you in Jerusalem, because I was an uncomfortable American Jew, I'd have to say, to give it some kind of context. But knowing you guys, I came to Jerusalem. And how long were you there before? Not very long, because then I visited you in Helsinki in 2001.
That's right. It was 2 years, exactly 2 years. Yeah.
And what was Helsinki like compared to? Comparing is not good. What was Helsinki like?
So Helsinki is again being a Roman to do as the Romans do in Helsinki. So I learned a bit. I learned the Finnish language. I don't say that I'm fluent in this language, but I can read it. Let's say basic text, and I learned the culture, the history of the country, which is also very interesting. And what I love there, it's the accessibility of the nature. It's a huge country which is mainly covered by forests. I think 70% of the territory is covered by forest. And you have a lot of lakes and rivers. And so also in the capital, Helsinki, you have parks everywhere. So and the sea is also everywhere. So that was something that I never experienced before, which I loved very much. And also the people, the Finns are very much attached to the nature. And it was exactly in the period when the consciousness of climate change started, and all these questions of protecting the environment were becoming a political issue, not just an issue of environmentalists. So that was very, very interesting experience. And the Finns themselves, they are, as ethnically, they are not Europeans. They are not Scandinavians. Many people say that Finland is Scandinavian. It is not. It's a Nordic country, but it's not. So ethnically, also, they are quite different. And that was also a unique experience. And we had very, very good contact and friendship with the Finns.
And then I didn't see you for many years, but I hope I didn't miss one of your posts, because maybe you were back in Jerusalem for how long after Helsinki, and was the next place you went Paris?
So I returned for 5 years back to Israel, to Jerusalem. And after 5 years, I felt that I was ready to relocate again. And then I did it to Paris. Yes.
And you just told me something yesterday that after your junior years in diplomacy, that you don't have to go anywhere, and that actually you have to seek out a post if you're interested in one. They might recommend one, which is a good idea for you to take if you want to advance your career, but you could stay in Jerusalem, and you must have requested the post in Paris.
That's definitely correct. Since the job is to represent your country, so if the country forces you to represent it, it might not end with a good result. So yes, and in many cases there are family considerations or others that a person want to stay longer in Israel in the headquarters, and that's fine. So you're not forced to leave. Sometimes you may offered if there's a vacant post that the HR thinks that it suits you and it would be a good promotion for you, so they may come and offer you. But it's up to my choice to decide if I want or not, and that was the case when when a new post was created in Paris for a representation to the OECD that Israel was joining by that time in 2014. I thought that would be great.
What's it called? OECD?
OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is maybe the one, if not the most important economic organization in the world, with 34 members. And Israel also was joining the organization, so we decided to create a representation in Paris, where the headquarters of this organization is. And I thought that would be a good opportunity for me, because it's not only because it is Paris, but also because the work was a kind of pioneering work. It was, again, like in Brussels, to learn a new institution and to create all the contacts with this organization in order to have to become an active member in this organization.
Yeah. Well, you've seen the birth of the European Union, and now we've all witnessed Brexit, and now we have a possible election of Marine Le Pen. And And we talked a little bit yesterday about the perhaps demise and the end of the European Union.
Yeah, but that may be a subject to different podcast.
Okay. I think that's a good call.
Yeah.
Maybe it's time for the Trules travel quiz. Okay?
Let's go for it.
All right. Where were you born?
Here I have to say that in practice, I was born in Ivory Coast, not in France. But I moved as a baby to France. Okay?
I think that's the answer. Right on there. So I got it wrong that you were born in France. You were born in Ivory Coast.
Yeah, I was in Ivory Coast, but even officially in my ID, it's written that I'm born in France. That is because Ivory Coast at that time was not yet independent. So it was part of, it was a French colony. And actually, my father, who is an architect, was sent there in order to prepare the country for the independence. So he was in charge of rural development. And so he was sent by the French government there. Not as a diplomat, but but that was also an official, kind of official mission for.
Yeah, a very diplomatic answer. You didn't want to contradict me when I introduced you as being born in France, but you've cleared it up.
Yeah. Also because officially that's what it says.
Yes. And this is a funny question. Where would you say you're from?
Israel.
Sure. Where do you call home?
Jerusalem.
What's your favorite place in the world?
The world itself.
The world itself. That's a good answer because you keep on reinventing and discovering every time you go someplace new.
Yeah.
What do you think it means to be a traveler?
To discover yourself.
That's also a good answer. What's one place that you've always wanted to go where you've never been? Just one, and why?
Ethiopia, because I think it seems to be a fascinating country. It's not that it's again like Liberia. It's a country that was never invaded or colonized, actually, only for a short period by the Italians in the 30s. But otherwise, it's a country that enjoyed independence for hundreds of years. It had a kingdom, so it is a very rich country in terms of culture and ethnicities, and also it has a very interesting Jewish history there, because you can trace the Jewish presence there from the time of the first temple. After the first temple destruction, so the first actually exile of Jews from Israel, and only now in the 20th century they were discovered and recognized as Jews, but they were cut from the Jewish people for over 2,000 years, and so that's also a fascinating part of Ethiopia.
I always fascinated by history, and I'd like to be able to take any year in human history and know everything across the globe that happened, but I'm pretty weak on it. But what I'm thinking must have been the destruction of the second temple where the Jews were exiled to Babylon. Is that right? And it's Nebuchadnezzar, or am I wrong about that?
Yes, that was after the destruction of the second temple by the Babylonians. Yeah, but before the second temple was destroyed, there was a first temple. Okay.
Yes.
And that was destroyed by the Assyrians, and the Jews were dispersed by the Assyrians out of Israel, and those who, but the Assyrian did not conquer the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, so where Jerusalem was located. So the 10 tribes were dispersed all over, and only 200 years later it took to the Babylonian to conquer Jerusalem. So it was different type of exiles, and the exile of the Babylonian, they were sent to Babylon. And they kept to live as a community, and later on they were allowed by the Persians who took over to return to build the second temple
Yes.
Okay, so they built the second temple, but those who were dispersed by the Assyrians, from what we call Israel and not Judah, there are hardly any remains of them, except very communities in dispersed places, like in Ethiopia, like in Cochin in India. They have some tribes that also were found in Afghanistan and different places that people realize that they have traditions very similar to the Jews. But of course, during 2,000 years, also the Jewish tradition evolved. I mean, let's say the mainstream Jewish tradition evolved. And so these tribes kept the traditions of the period of the first temple. So it was not evident immediately, but these people when they were told what is their history, and they told the story of the Jews, that we lived in a country, we had a temple, and so
I went to the Jewish quarter in Kochi in Cochin in India.
Right.
It's small but remarkable. They sort of honor its history.
Yes.
It's interesting to go there.
Yeah.
That's all in your response to the one city you'd like to go to, one place you'd like to go to, Ethiopia. What's your favorite city? Why?
Maybe Jerusalem. Yeah. Why? Because it has 3,000 years of history, and it is a multicultural, multi-ethnic country. Even today, is multi-religious. So it's not just all the history, but also the presence of the people today is very enriching. And also climate, it's very pleasant to live in Jerusalem. It's never too hot, never too cold. So
it's a little like Los Angeles.
Yes, a bit.
Have the same fruits and trees and climate.
Sure.
But whereas Jerusalem has 3,000 years or more of history, Los Angeles feels like it has no history. It tears down its history. It's always reinventing and building new things. And it's been here a minute in time, from the early 20th century or the gold rush of 1849 or something like that.
But sometimes it's better in this way, because to have 3,000 years of history, it may be also a burden. So, you feel it in Jerusalem. It's not like being in any other cities.
Yes. Yeah, I think we all know what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite non-urban place? A park or something that's not a city?
I like very much the Alps. It has beautiful sceneries, dramatic ones. And also the weather can change very quickly from sunny to stormy. So I like very much, and not just for skiing in winter, but I liked very much the Alps during summertime to make just long walks in nature. Huh? Yes.
What's your favorite mode of transportation?
If possible, my feet.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Who do you like to travel with?
With people who I love.
Two forks diverged in a road. Which way would you go? Why?
The road of love and justice.
All right. Just have to figure out which way that would be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's the last question, also a little metaphorical.
Mm-hmm.
Where will you go when you die?
Back to my creator.
Okay. Thanks for being on the show, Rafi. I hope my listeners have enjoyed your unique travel story by being a career diplomat. I know you can't announce your next post yet, but I look forward to visiting you there, wherever it will be. I'd also like to thank you, my audience, for listening, and I invite you to visit my website to leave your comments and to hear any previous episodes you've missed. That link is erictrules.com/podcast. If you're listening on iTunes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. And everyone, please tell all your friends about the podcast to help it grow. To find out more about becoming a SERVAS member, please go to servas.org on the web or to usservas.org for American membership. To contact me about anything, please send me a message at erictrules.com. Until next time, happy trails. Original music composed by Amanda Yamate. Sound engineered by Scott Barber at the Barbershop Recording Studio in Echo Park, California. Produced by Harry Duran at Fullcast. This podcast has been supported with a USC Capstone Grant. Special thanks to Phil Allen and USC's School of Dramatic Arts for their support.